The morning of September 15th started like any other late summer day in Vermilion Parish, Louisiana. But by evening, the Hartwell family would find themselves thrust into a survival situation that would test every limit of their endurance, resourcefulness, and faith in each other. Jake Hartwell, a 42-year-old construction foreman with calloused hands and sun-weathered skin from decades of outdoor work, stood on the back porch of their modest two-story home, coffee mug in hand, watching the ominous dark clouds gathering on the horizon like an advancing army. The air felt thick and electric, carrying that distinctive smell of impending rain that every Louisiana native recognizes instinctively. Jake had lived through Hurricane Katrina, multiple tropical storms, and countless flash flood warnings that had amounted to nothing more than temporary inconvenience. But something about this morning felt fundamentally different. The meteorologists on the local news were using words like unprecedented and historic rainfall totals, and their usual confident demeanor had been replaced by genuine concern that made Jake's stomach tighten with unease. His wife, Lisa, emerged from the kitchen, her teacher's bag packed for another day at Vermilion Elementary School, where she had taught third grade for the past 12 years. At 38, Lisa possessed the kind of patient, nurturing demeanor that made her beloved by both students and parents throughout the community. Her brown hair was pulled back in a practical ponytail, and her face showed the same concern that Jake felt as she checked the weather app on her smartphone. The National Weather Service is predicting 8 to 12 inches of rain over the next 48 hours, she said, showing Jake the radar image that revealed a massive storm system stretching across Louisiana, Mississippi, and Alabama like a green and red monster consuming everything in its path. Their son Austin, a lanky 14-year-old who had inherited his father's practical nature and mechanical aptitude, was loading his backpack with textbooks when he overheard the conversation between his parents. Despite his youth, Austin possessed an unusual maturity and observational skills that often surprised adults. "Mom, if it's going to flood badly, shouldn't we be getting ready to leave now instead of waiting?" he asked, his voice carrying the kind of logic that cut straight through adult hesitation and denial. His 11-year-old sister Melody bounded into the room with characteristic energy, her blonde pigtails swinging as she grabbed her lunchbox and began chattering about the science project she was supposed to present that day. Despite being the youngest member of the family, Melody often displayed a wisdom and emotional intelligence beyond her years, along with an infectious optimism that had carried the family through difficult times, including Jake's father's death 2 years earlier, and a period of unemployment that had tested their financial stability. Jake had lived in Louisiana his entire life, born and raised in the same parish where his father and grandfather had worked the oil fields and shrimp boats that formed the backbone of the local economy. He understood the rhythms of Gulf Coast weather, the way storms could build and dissipate, the difference between serious threats and media hype. But as he watched the radar loop on Lisa's phone, showing the storm system intensifying rather than weakening as it approached their area, his construction experience and natural caution began sending alarm signals that he couldn't ignore. By mid-morning, the first drops of rain had begun to fall, fat and warm, and carrying the promise of much more to come. Lisa had been sent home early from school when the district decided to close all facilities as a precautionary measure, something that happened rarely enough to underscore the seriousness of the approaching storm. The family gathered in their living room, watching local news coverage as reporters described rapidly rising water levels throughout Vermilion Parish and neighboring areas. Jake's cell phone buzzed constantly with calls from members of his construction crew, many of whom were dealing with flooding at their own homes and job sites. As the crew foreman, he felt responsible for his workers' safety and had spent the morning calling each man to make sure they had evacuation plans and safe places to stay. The irony that he was so focused on everyone else's safety while potentially neglecting his own family's preparations wasn't lost on him, but it reflected the kind of man Jake was, always putting others' needs before his own. Before we continue with this incredible story of survival, determination, and the unbreakable bonds of family, please take a moment to subscribe to our channel and let us know in the comments where you're watching from. We love connecting with viewers from all over the world who appreciate real stories of human resilience and courage in the face of overwhelming odds. By afternoon, the rain had intensified into a steady downpour that drummed against the windows and roof with increasing intensity. Lisa had retrieved her daily journal, a leather-bound book where she had recorded her thoughts and experiences since college, and began documenting what was clearly becoming an extraordinary day. Her teaching background had instilled in her a natural tendency to observe and record details, a habit that would prove crucial in the days ahead. The first real sign of trouble came around 4 p.m. when their elderly neighbor, Mrs. Evangeline Boudreaux, knocked frantically on their front door. The 74-year-old widow lived alone in a small Creole cottage that sat on lower ground than the Hartwell property, and water had already begun seeping through her doors and windows. Jake and Austin immediately waded through the rapidly rising water to help her move essential belongings and medications to the Hartwell house, while Lisa prepared the guest room and Melody gathered extra blankets and pillows. Mrs. Boudreaux had lived in Vermilion Parish her entire life and had survived Hurricane Audrey in 1957, one of the most devastating storms in Louisiana history. Her presence brought both comfort and concern. Comfort because her experience and wisdom would prove invaluable, but concern because at her age she was more vulnerable to the physical demands that might lie ahead. She carried herself with the dignity and strength that characterized her generation, but Jake could see the worry in her weathered face as she watched the water continue rising in what had once been their quiet residential neighborhood. Throughout the evening, the situation deteriorated with alarming speed. What had started as minor street flooding had transformed their entire neighborhood into a shallow lake that continued rising by the hour. Jake barely slept that night, checking the water level every few hours by flashlight and monitoring emergency radio broadcasts that painted an increasingly dire picture of conditions throughout the region. Emergency services were overwhelmed with rescue calls, and many roads that typically served as evacuation routes had become impassable. Lisa's first journal entry about their crisis captured the family's initial shock and growing realization that they were facing something unprecedented. September 15th, the rain hasn't stopped for 8 hours, and it's getting worse instead of better. Mrs. Boudreaux is safe with us upstairs, but her house is completely flooded now. Jake has been checking the water level obsessively, and I can see the worry in his eyes, even though he's trying to stay calm for the children. Austin and Melody are handling this better than I expected, but I know they're scared. The local news is reporting that this storm system is much more intense than anyone predicted, and entire communities are being evacuated. I'm writing this down because I have a feeling we're going to need a record of what happens next. By dawn, on September 16th, the view from their second-story windows revealed a landscape transformed beyond recognition. What had been their front yard, complete with Lisa's carefully tended flower garden and the oak tree where Austin had built a treehouse, was now part of a vast lake that extended as far as they could see in every direction. Their two vehicles, Jake's pickup truck and Lisa's sedan, were completely submerged, with only their roof lines visible above the murky brown water. The decision to evacuate came when Jake realized that the water was not only continuing to rise, but was moving with a current that suggested their house might not remain safe much longer. Emergency services had stopped responding to calls in their area, and the few evacuation shelters that remained accessible were reportedly at capacity and turning people away. It was Austin who reminded his father about the old aluminum fishing boat that had belonged to Jake's father, stored in their garage for the past several years since the old man's death. The boat was a 16-foot craft that had seen better days, but was still fundamentally sound, though it hadn't been used for anything more than occasional fishing trips to Lake Pontchartrain. Jake and his father had spent countless weekends working on that boat, and now it represented their family's only hope for reaching safety. Working quickly in the partially flooded garage, Jake and Austin began loading the boat with essential supplies, while Lisa and Melody gathered important documents, medications, and enough food and water for several days. Mrs. Boudreaux, despite her age and the stress of losing her home, proved remarkably resilient and helpful during the preparation process. She had lived through enough disasters to know what items were truly essential for survival, and her calm demeanor helped keep the family focused on practical preparations rather than becoming overwhelmed by the emotional impact of abandoning their home. She insisted on bringing her own small bag of supplies and medications, determined not to be a burden on the family that was saving her life. The launch from their garage was more harrowing than Jake had anticipated. The current was much stronger than anything he had experienced during recreational boating, and within minutes of pushing off from their property, they found themselves being swept away from everything familiar at a speed that made steering difficult and navigation nearly impossible. Jake struggled with the outboard motor, trying to direct their course toward what appeared to be higher ground in the distance, but the floodwater was filled with debris that made progress dangerous and unpredictable. What none of them realized at the time was that they were being carried into the Atchafalaya Basin, Louisiana's vast wilderness area that encompasses over 4 million acres of wetlands, swamps, and forests. Under normal conditions, the basin is a stunningly beautiful ecosystem that supports incredible biodiversity and serves as a crucial flood control system for the Mississippi River. During extreme flood conditions, however, it becomes an almost impenetrable maze where even experienced outdoorsmen and commercial fishermen can become hopelessly disoriented and lost. The family's cell phones had lost signal within the first hour of their journey, cutting them off completely from any possibility of calling for help or letting worried relatives know their location and condition. Jake's attempts to signal the rescue helicopters that occasionally passed overhead proved futile, as the aircraft were focused on populated areas where people were known to be stranded on rooftops and in trees, and the thick canopy of the flooded forest made it nearly impossible for pilots to spot small boats below. By late afternoon on their first day, they had managed to reach what appeared to be a small island, really just a slightly elevated area where the tops of mature trees created a natural shelter and the ground was solid enough to beach their boat safely. Jake immediately put his construction experience to work, using rope from their emergency kit and a tarp to create a basic shelter that would protect them from the elements. The boat was pulled up as far as possible onto the muddy ground and secured with multiple lines to prevent it from floating away during the night. Lisa's journal entry for their first full day reflected both the practical challenges they faced and the emotional impact of their situation. September 16th, we're somewhere in what Jake thinks might be the Atchafalaya Basin, though everything looks different when it's covered with floodwater. We managed to find this little island where we can camp for the night, but we have no idea how far we are from civilization or how long it might take rescuers to find us. The children are being incredibly brave. Austin has been helping Jake with everything from navigation to setting up our shelter, and Melody has been keeping all of our spirits up with songs and stories. Mrs. Boudreaux has been sharing wisdom from previous disasters she's survived, which helps us feel less alone and hopeless. The second day brought both new challenges and small discoveries that would prove crucial to their survival. Austin demonstrated an unexpected talent for reading the subtle signs of water current and wind direction, skills that seemed to come naturally despite his lack of formal training in wilderness survival. Meanwhile, Melody's cheerful personality and determined optimism became a source of emotional strength that prevented the family from sinking into despair during moments when their situation seemed hopeless. Jake was struggling with feelings of responsibility and frustration that threatened to overwhelm his ability to think clearly and make good decisions. As the family's traditional protector and provider, he felt personally responsible for their predicament and was haunted by second-guessing his decision-making process. His construction background had taught him to solve problems through careful planning and hard work, but their current situation seemed to defy all conventional approaches to problem-solving. Mrs. Boudreaux proved to be an invaluable source of practical knowledge and emotional stability. Having lived through Hurricane Audrey in 1957, she understood both the physical and psychological challenges of surviving natural disasters. She taught the family how to collect and purify rainwater using available materials, how to identify which wild plants might be safe to consume if their food supplies ran low, and most importantly, how to maintain hope and family unity when everything seemed to be falling apart. The elderly woman also shared stories of her late husband's experiences as a commercial fisherman who had occasionally become lost in the basin during fog or storms. These stories provided valuable insights into the geography and navigation challenges of their environment, while also demonstrating that people had survived similar situations before. Her presence reminded everyone that they were part of a long tradition of Louisiana residents who had faced and overcome seemingly impossible natural disasters. Lisa continued documenting their experience with increasing detail and emotional depth. September 17th, our second full day stranded in this wilderness. Jake is getting more frustrated with our situation, and I can see him blaming himself for not evacuating sooner. But how could any of us have predicted flooding of this magnitude? The Weather Service predicted significant rain, not a biblical flood that would transform our entire region. Austin has been absolutely incredible, showing maturity and practical skills that amaze me every day. He's become Jake's right-hand man in all our survival efforts. Melody continues to be our emotional anchor, somehow maintaining her optimism and keeping the rest of us from falling into despair. Mrs. Boudreaux has been sharing survival knowledge from her many decades of Louisiana living, and her stories help us remember that people have endured worse situations and lived to tell about them. The third day marked a crucial turning point in their psychological journey from crisis to adaptation. The initial shock and adrenaline that had carried them through the first 48 hours had worn off, replaced by the sobering realization that they might be stranded for an extended period with no guarantee of rescue. Their carefully rationed food supplies were running lower than Jake had hoped, and their freshwater situation was becoming increasingly concerning. The floodwater surrounding them was contaminated with debris, chemicals, agricultural runoff, and sewage from the upstream communities that had been inundated before the storm reached their area. Jake attempted to fish using improvised hooks made from safety pins and small pieces of their emergency food supplies as bait. His success was limited initially, but persistence and Austin's quick learning ability eventually resulted in catching several small fish that provided both essential protein and a significant morale boost for the entire group. Meanwhile, in the world they had temporarily left behind, massive rescue operations were being coordinated by multiple agencies working around the clock to locate and assist flood victims throughout the affected region. Lieutenant Colonel David Brennan of the Louisiana National Guard had been awake for over 60 hours straight. coordinating helicopter and boat rescue missions that had successfully saved hundreds of people from rooftops, stranded vehicles, and temporary shelters constructed in trees and on higher ground. The scale of the disaster was unprecedented in recent Louisiana history, with entire communities submerged and thousands of people displaced from their homes. The Hartwell family had been reported missing by Lisa's sister when they failed to arrive at the planned evacuation shelter, but with so many people unaccounted for and rescue resources stretched beyond their limits, their case was just one among hundreds of urgent priorities competing for attention and resources. Search and rescue operations in the Atchafalaya Basin presented unique and dangerous challenges that tested even the most experienced rescue personnel. The vast size of the area, larger than the state of Delaware, made systematic searches extremely difficult and time-consuming under the best of conditions. The current flood conditions made the work exponentially more dangerous, with swift currents, hidden obstacles, and the constant risk of rescue personnel themselves becoming stranded or injured. Chief Warrant Officer Rebecca Torres, a helicopter pilot with over 15 years of search and rescue experience, had been flying continuous missions since the flooding began, taking only brief breaks for fuel and aircraft maintenance. Her crew had investigated dozens of potential survivor sightings that had turned out to be debris, wildlife, or optical illusions created by the unfamiliar landscape of the flooded wilderness. The emotional toll of the rescue operations was enormous. Every successful rescue was cause for celebration, but the knowledge that people were still out there, waiting for help that might not arrive in time, created constant pressure and stress. Officer Torres and her crew had developed systematic search patterns designed to cover the maximum area while maintaining safety margins for their aircraft and crew. They flew at low altitudes when weather conditions permitted, using both visual observation and thermal imaging equipment to detect signs of human presence. However, the thick canopy of cypress and tupelo trees that characterizes much of the basin made it nearly impossible to spot small boats or makeshift shelters from above, even with the most advanced equipment available. On their fourth day stranded, the Hartwell family faced their most serious crisis since the initial evacuation. Mrs. Boudreaux, who had been a pillar of strength and wisdom throughout their ordeal, began showing unmistakable signs of dehydration and physical exhaustion that concerned everyone in the group. At 74 years old, the constant stress and physical demands of their survival situation were taking a severe toll on her health, despite her remarkable resilience and determination to remain strong for the family that had saved her life. Lisa, drawing on her experience caring for elderly relatives and her natural nurturing instincts as a teacher and mother, recognized the symptoms and knew they needed to find help soon, or risk losing the woman who had become such an integral part of their survival story. Mrs. Boudreaux tried to hide her weakness and continued contributing to their daily survival efforts, but her condition was deteriorating in ways that couldn't be concealed from people who had come to know her so well over the past several days. The family held what amounted to a council of war that evening, discussing their options with the kind of serious deliberation typically reserved for much older people facing life or death decisions. Jake wanted to attempt navigating toward what he believed might be a main waterway that could lead them back to civilization, but the risk of becoming even more lost in the vast wilderness was significant. Austin suggested they focus their energy on creating a more visible signal for rescue aircraft, using materials from their emergency supplies and anything else they could find to attract attention from above. Melody, with the kind of innocent wisdom that children sometimes possess, suggested they pray together as a family, a proposal that initially made Jake uncomfortable given his complicated relationship with religion since his father's death, but which ultimately brought them closer together during one of their darkest moments. The family prayer became a daily ritual that provided emotional strength and unity, regardless of individual beliefs about its spiritual efficacy. Lisa's journal entry for their fourth day captured the growing seriousness of their situation, while also reflecting the family's determination to support each other. September 19th. Mrs. Boudreaux is not doing well, though she's trying to hide her weakness from us. I can see she's getting more tired and confused, and I'm genuinely frightened about what might happen if we don't find help soon. Jake is torn between staying put and hoping rescuers find us, or attempting to navigate toward what might be civilization and risking getting more lost in this endless wilderness. Austin has been taking on responsibilities and showing leadership that no 14-year-old should have to handle, but he's rising to every challenge with remarkable maturity. Melody suggested we pray together tonight, and even Jake, who hasn't been religious since his father died, seemed to find comfort in our family unity. I have to believe that someone will find us. We've come too far and fought too hard to give up now. The fifth day brought both their greatest hope and most crushing disappointment in a single afternoon that would be burned into their memories forever. Around noon, they heard the distinctive sound of helicopter rotors approaching their location from the northeast, growing steadily louder until it seemed the aircraft was almost directly overhead. The entire family burst into frantic activity, waving everything bright they could find: Lisa's red jacket, a yellow emergency blanket from their supply kit, even Melody's colorful stuffed animal that had somehow remained cheerful and bright despite everything they had endured. Jake stood in their beached boat, waving his arms above his head and shouting at the top of his lungs, even though he knew rationally that the pilot couldn't possibly hear him over the noise of the rotors and engine. Austin had climbed onto the highest point of their small island, making himself as visible as possible against the backdrop of trees and sky. Even Mrs. Boudreaux, despite her increasing weakness, had managed to stand and wave a white towel that contrasted sharply with the green and brown landscape surrounding them. The helicopter circled their area for what felt like an eternity, but was probably only 10 or 15 minutes, flying low enough that they could clearly see the pilot's helmet and the rescue equipment mounted on the sides of the aircraft. It hovered directly overhead for several minutes, close enough that they could feel the downwash from the rotors and were certain they had been spotted and identified as survivors in need of rescue. The family held hands and watched in amazement as their salvation seemed to materialize from the sky above. Then, without warning or explanation that they could understand, the helicopter banked sharply to the left and disappeared over the tree line, leaving them standing on their tiny island in complete shock and disbelief. The silence that followed the fading rotor noise was more devastating than any sound they had heard during their entire ordeal. Jake actually broke down and cried, the first time his children had ever seen their father show such raw, uncontrolled emotion, while Lisa held him and tried to process what had just happened to their family. What the family couldn't know was that Chief Warrant Officer Torres had indeed spotted their makeshift shelter and had carefully marked the GPS coordinates of their location. However, dense fog that had been moving through the basin all morning had prevented her from getting a clear visual confirmation that people were actually present on the ground, rather than just debris or equipment that might have appeared human-like from a distance. Standard rescue protocols required positive identification of survivors before committing ground rescue teams to dangerous and time-consuming operations in the difficult terrain of the flooded wilderness. Officer Torres had reported their sighting to the Rescue Coordination Center as a possible survivor location requiring ground team investigation. But with dozens of similar reports waiting to be investigated and only a limited number of ground rescue teams available for the dangerous work of navigating the flooded basin, it would be at least 24 to 48 hours before anyone could reach their remote location to confirm whether survivors were actually present. The sixth day dawned grey and oppressive, with the kind of humid heat that characterizes late summer in Louisiana, made worse by the constant evaporation from the floodwater surrounding them on all sides. Mrs. Boudreaux's condition had deteriorated significantly overnight, and Lisa was genuinely frightened that the elderly woman might not survive much longer without proper medical attention and the medications she needed for her various health conditions. The family's water supply had been reduced to less than a gallon, carefully hoarded and rationed to make it last as long as possible. Their food consisted of a few energy bars, some crackers, and the small fish that Jake and Austin had managed to catch using their improvised fishing techniques. Everyone was losing weight and showing signs of the physical stress that comes with prolonged exposure to the elements and inadequate nutrition, but their spirits remained remarkably strong thanks to their mutual support and determination. It was Austin who made the crucial observation that would ultimately lead to their rescue and survival. The teenager had developed a habit of studying their surroundings carefully each morning, looking for any changes that might provide opportunities or indicate dangers. On this morning, he noticed that the water level around their island had dropped slightly during the night, suggesting that the overall flood levels might be beginning to recede in some areas. More importantly, Austin had spotted what appeared to be a navigation marker in the distance, a tall pole topped with reflective signs that indicated they might be near an established waterway rather than completely lost in the unmarked wilderness. He pointed out the marker to his father and insisted they investigate, despite Jake's initial skepticism about expending their limited energy on what might turn out to be another false hope. The decision to investigate Austin's discovery required the family to commit their remaining strength to moving their increasingly leaky boat across several hundred yards of open water toward the distant marker. Using the boat's small paddle and working together as a coordinated team, they began the exhausting process of propelling their craft through water that seemed to resist their every effort. The work was backbreaking in the oppressive heat and humidity, and they had to stop frequently to rest and bail water from their aluminum boat, which had developed several small leaks during their days of rough use. As they got closer to the navigation marker, Jake began to realize that his son's keen observation skills had been absolutely correct. They had found their way to Bayou Teche, a major waterway that formed part of the historic route used by early French explorers and settlers to navigate Louisiana's complex river system. More importantly for their immediate survival, this was a waterway that rescue boats would be likely to patrol in their systematic search for stranded flood victims throughout the basin. For the first time in days, Jake felt a genuine surge of hope and optimism that they might actually survive their ordeal and be reunited with the world they had left behind. Bayou Teche connected to larger waterways that led back to populated areas, and its well-marked navigation channel made it a logical place for rescue teams to focus their search efforts. The family's spirits soared as they realized they had found their way to what amounted to a highway through the wilderness that would eventually lead them home. Lisa made what she believed might be her final diary entry, not knowing that rescue was only hours away. September 21st, day 6 of our ordeal. Austin may have saved us all with his sharp eyes and determination to investigate that navigation marker. We found what Jake believes is Bayou Teche, a real waterway that rescue boats might patrol in their search for people like us. Mrs. Boudreaux is very weak and needs medical attention desperately, but she's still fighting with the kind of strength that amazes me every day. I'm leaving this diary in the boat in case we don't make it and someone finds it later. If you're reading this, please know that we never gave up hope and that we discovered we love each other more than ever before. Austin has become a man during these 6 days, showing courage and wisdom beyond his years. Melody has been our sunshine when everything seemed dark, keeping our spirits alive with her optimism and love. Jake has been our rock and protector, even when I could see he was scared and felt responsible for our situation. We are stronger together than any of us could have been alone. The family managed to beach their boat on a muddy bank near the navigation marker, positioning themselves where they would be clearly visible to any rescue teams patrolling the waterway. They arranged their brightest clothing and emergency supplies to create the most effective signal possible, then settled down to wait with a mixture of hope and resignation. Jake estimated they had perhaps one more day of water remaining, and everyone understood without discussion that Mrs. Boudreaux's condition was becoming critical. That afternoon, their 6-day ordeal finally came to an end when Officer Michael Tran of the Louisiana Department of Wildlife and Fisheries spotted their aluminum boat during a systematic patrol of Bayou Teche. Officer Tran had been working 16-hour shifts since the flooding began, searching waterways throughout the basin for survivors and coordinating with helicopter and ground rescue teams. When he saw the boat pulled up on the muddy bank with 5 people waving frantically from the shore, he felt the kind of professional satisfaction that made all the long hours and dangerous conditions worthwhile. "This is Unit 47 to Rescue Coordination," Officer Tran radioed, his voice steady despite the emotion he felt witnessing the family's joy and relief. "I have 5 flood survivors at GPS coordinates 29. 7755 North, 91, 33112 West on Bayou Teche, requesting immediate medical helicopter evacuation for elderly female, showing signs of severe dehydration and possible medical complications. All survivors appear conscious and responsive, but in need of immediate medical attention and support." The rescue helicopter arrived within 30 minutes of Officer Tran's radio call, and as the Hartwell family and Mrs. Boudreaux were carefully lifted to safety, Lisa clutched her waterproof diary tightly against her chest. The detailed record of their 6-day survival ordeal would later prove invaluable to emergency management officials, rescue coordinators, and researchers studying disaster survival psychology. Her day-by-day account provided crucial insights into how flood victims might survive in the basin environment and where rescue teams should focus their search efforts during future disasters. At the hospital in Baton Rouge, emergency room doctors treated the family for dehydration, exposure, minor cuts and infections, and the psychological trauma of their extended survival ordeal. Remarkably, none of them had suffered serious physical injuries despite 6 days of exposure to the elements and the constant stress of their situation. Mrs. Boudreaux required more intensive medical treatment for her dehydration and underlying health conditions, but she made a complete recovery and later credited the Hartwell family with saving her life through their kindness, inclusion, and determination to care for her despite the additional burden her presence created for their survival efforts. Jake experienced an emotional breakdown when he was finally able to call Lisa's sister and report that the entire family had survived and was safe. For the first time in 6 days, he allowed himself to fully process the overwhelming fear, responsibility, and exhaustion that he had carried as the family's protector and decision-maker. The relief of knowing they had all survived transformed him temporarily into the scared, grateful human being he had hidden beneath his strong exterior throughout their ordeal. Austin was praised as a hero by the rescue team, emergency management officials, and news media for his mature leadership, keen observation skills, and crucial role in navigating the family to safety. His ability to read environmental signs, make accurate observations about their surroundings, and maintain hope during their darkest moments had been instrumental in their ultimate rescue and survival. The experience had transformed him from a typical teenager into a young man with genuine confidence in his ability to handle serious responsibilities and challenges. Melody's unwavering optimism, emotional support, and ability to maintain family unity during their most difficult moments prove that age and size have little correlation with inner strength and wisdom. Her cheerful songs, games, and determination to see the positive aspects of their situation had prevented the family from sinking into the kind of despair that destroys survival motivation. She had been their emotional anchor when everything seemed hopeless, demonstrating that sometimes the youngest member of a group provides the greatest spiritual leadership. Lisa's diary, with its detailed daily account of their survival experience, became a valuable resource that was studied by emergency management officials, rescue personnel, and academic researchers interested in disaster psychology and family dynamics under extreme stress. Her words captured not only the practical challenges of surviving in flood conditions, but also the emotional and psychological journey of a family that refused to abandon hope even when their situation appeared hopeless. The diary was eventually published as part of a larger study of disaster survival techniques and family resilience. The rescue made national news, and the Hartwell family found themselves reluctant celebrities as their story of survival resonated with people throughout the United States and beyond. Television interviews, newspaper articles, and magazine features focused on their determination, family unity, and the crucial role that preparation, clear thinking, and mutual support had played in their survival. They received thousands of letters and emails from people who had been inspired by their story, or who shared their own experiences of surviving natural disasters. 6 months after their rescue, the Hartwells returned to Vermilion Parish to visit the area where they had been stranded and fought for their lives. The floodwaters had long since receded, revealing the Atchafalaya Basin in its natural state as one of America's most beautiful and ecologically important wetland areas. Standing on the deck of a tour boat in calm, peaceful conditions, looking out over the cypress swamp where they had experienced both terror and triumph, Jake put his arm around Lisa and said quietly, "We survived something that could have destroyed our family, but instead it made us stronger and more connected than we ever imagined possible." Their old house had been too severely damaged by the floodwater to repair economically, so the family made the decision to rebuild their lives in a new community located on higher ground with better evacuation routes and emergency planning. Lisa eventually expanded her diary entries into a full-length book titled 6 Days in the Basin, A Family's Story of Survival and Hope, with all proceeds donated to flood relief organizations, emergency preparedness programs, and research into disaster survival techniques. The book became a bestseller and was credited with inspiring improved family emergency planning throughout Louisiana and other flood-prone regions across the United States. Lisa was invited to speak at emergency management conferences, school safety programs, and community preparedness events, sharing both the practical lessons learned during their ordeal and the emotional insights about family strength and resilience that had emerged from their experience. Years later, when Austin graduated from college with a degree in emergency management and disaster relief coordination, and Melody completed her training as a pediatric nurse specializing in trauma recovery, both credited their 6 days stranded in the flood with shaping their career choices and their fundamental perspectives on what truly matters in life. Their shared experience had created an unbreakable bond and a deep understanding of human resilience that influenced every aspect of their adult lives and professional choices. Mrs. Boudreaux lived several more healthy years before passing peacefully at age 79, and she remained extraordinarily close to the Hartwell family throughout that time. She often said that those 6 days in the wilderness had given her more faith in human goodness, resilience, and the power of love than all her previous decades of life experience combined. She became an honorary grandmother to Austin and Melody, and her wisdom continued to guide the family long after their rescue. The story of the Hartwell family's survival became a permanent part of Louisiana folklore, and a testament to the power of preparation, family unity, clear thinking under pressure, and absolute refusal to surrender hope, even in the face of seemingly impossible circumstances. Their experience demonstrated that ordinary people, when confronted with extraordinary challenges, can discover reserves of strength, courage, and wisdom they never knew they possessed, and that the bonds of family love can provide the foundation for surviving anything life presents.